My name is Ethan, and I'm 25 now. But this story starts back when I was just 12 years old. At that time, I thought my family was normal, or at least what normal looked like in my world. We lived in a modest home in Austin, Texas. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had a roof over our heads, food on the table, and clothes that weren't ragged. My parents, Melissa and Daniel, worked hard enough to keep things going, or so it seemed on the surface. Then there was my older sister, Olivia. Olivia was the perfect kid, the golden child. Teachers adored her, relatives couldn't stop talking about how smart and talented she was, and my parents made sure she knew she was the favorite. Whenever Olivia did something, no matter how small, it was a big deal, a masterpiece. Me. I was just Ethan. Not bad, not trouble, but always in the background. My drawings never made it to the fridge, and my achievements were met with a polite, "That's nice." I didn't resent Olivia for it. It wasn't her fault she was loved more. But the way I was treated made me feel invisible and unimportant. One day, while playing with my old action figures in my room, my mom called me downstairs. She had that calm, rehearsed tone parents use when something serious is about to happen, but you can tell from the tightness in her voice that something was wrong. When I entered the living room, both my mom and dad were sitting there looking way too serious. Dad motioned me to sit opposite them. It felt more like a meeting than a family talk. Mom tried to look sympathetic, but there was a coldness underneath. "We need to talk, Ethan," Mom said. My mind immediately raced to worst-case scenarios, someone sick, someone gone. Then Dad said, "We're facing some financial struggles and can't afford to care for you anymore." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Am I some subscription you're canceling?" Mom kept repeating that it wasn't my fault that they'd struggled for a while and had to make a hard decision. That decision was to place me in foster care. I asked why Olivia couldn't go too. Mom's face briefly hardened before she said, "Olivia needs stability. She's in school, she can't move around like this." Dad added, "It's not about choosing between you two, it's about what makes sense now." I broke down crying loud, desperate sobs. I pushed Mom's hug away and kept asking, "Why are you doing this to me?" They kept repeating their lines about tough choices and financial problems. The next day, they packed a small bag for me and drove me to the foster home. The ride was quiet, heavy with tension. I kept hoping they'd change their minds. They didn't. At the foster home, Mr. and Mrs. Barnes welcomed me warmly. Mrs. Barnes made pancakes every morning. Mr. Barnes tried to lighten the mood with trivia. Still, I wasn't ready to trust anyone. My parents' promise that this was temporary felt like a lifeline, but deep inside I feared it was permanent. School started again, and I faced questions I couldn't answer. Where was I from? Why was I here? I told vague lies, parents working out of state, but the bitterness lingered. One afternoon, I looked up my parents online, desperate for signs they still cared. Instead, I found photos of them on tropical beaches, smiling and carefree. Olivia was front and center, showered with praise. It hit me hard. They had left me not out of necessity, but choice. After the initial shock of being placed in foster care, I slowly began to adjust to my new environment. The Barnes family was kind enough. Mrs. Barnes had a warm smile that greeted me every morning, and Mr. Barnes tried his best to keep things light with jokes and trivia. But no matter how welcoming they were, I couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment. Every night I'd lie awake in my small, unfamiliar room clutching the duffel bag my parents had packed, replaying their words over and over. Financial struggles, Hard decisions, temporary words that felt hollow and distant from the truth I later uncovered. I wanted to believe the promise that this was just a pause, that I would be back home soon. But as days turned to weeks and weeks to months, the silence from my parents grew louder than any phone call. No messages, no visits, nothing. At school, I was the new kid with a heavy secret. The other children asked where I was, from why I wasn't living with my parents. I gave vague answers. They're working out of state. I never dared explain the real reason. It was too painful, too humiliating. Slowly, I began to notice that my classmates seemed to fit into neat little boxes. A family here, a support system there. I didn't have that. I was alone, left to navigate childhood and adolescence without the safety net most kids took for granted. One day when I was 13, I accidentally stumbled upon my parents' social media profiles. I didn't expect to find much, just hoping for a glimpse of their lives, maybe some sign they still cared. What I found shattered any hope left. Photos of my parents basking in the sun on exotic beaches, laughing over fancy dinners, and jetting off to glamorous destinations filled their feeds. Olivia was always at their side, smiling like the cherished child she was. The captions were full of praise and love directed solely at her. I scrolled through their posts, a knot tightening in my stomach. They had told me they couldn't afford to care for me yet. Here they were, living a lifestyle that seemed worlds away from our modest past. Worse yet, they maintained a travel blog detailing their adventures, portraying their freedom after letting go of material possessions. It was painfully clear they were referring to me as one of those possessions they had discarded. Beneath their posts, I noticed cryptic comments from anonymous accounts. Must be nice running away and leaving everything behind, one read. Another hinted at their irresponsibility and escape from consequences. I couldn't stop thinking about those comments. Were people aware of the truth? Did anyone see past the glossy facade my parents projected? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not just at them, but at the world that seemed to turn a blind eye. The loneliness in foster care was harsh, but the emotional betrayal was worse. I began to question my worth, wondering why my own family could abandon me so completely. Despite the pain, I found some solace in the Barnes family. They may not have been my birth parents, but their steady presence and genuine care slowly helped me heal. Mrs. Barnes made sure I had breakfast every day, and Mr. Barnes encouraged me to keep trying, telling me, "You're stronger than you think, Ethan." At school, I started to cautiously open up, joining clubs and making a few friends. I found an outlet in the debate team, channeling my anger and frustration into arguments and speeches. It gave me a sense of control, a place where my voice mattered. I took on a part-time job at a local bookstore, a quiet refuge where I could immerse myself in books and avoid the painful thoughts. Each paycheck was a step toward independence, a reminder that I could build a life of my own. One day I met Ryan, a classmate who treated me like an equal, not like some charity case. When I shared my story, he listened without judgment and invited me to hang out. For the first time in a long time, I felt accepted. But even as I started rebuilding, the shadow of my parents' abandonment lingered. Their social media posts, their travel blog, and their silence haunted me. At night, I confided in the Barneses, sharing my fears and frustrations. Mr. Barnes told me, "It's not your fault, Ethan. You didn't choose this, but you can choose how you move forward." Those words stuck with me. Slowly, I began to realize that my parents' choices did not define me. I was more than their mistakes. As I moved into my teenage years, the reality of my situation settled heavily on my shoulders. The days in foster care stretched on, and the silence from my birth parents became deafening. They had disappeared from my life, replaced by the gentle but unfamiliar care of the Barneses. Though they provided me with a stable home, the emotional void left by Melissa and Daniel's abandonment was impossible to fill. I struggled to make sense of how my own parents could choose to leave me behind, yet continue to live a life filled with adventure and luxury alongside Olivia. School became a complicated place. I tried to keep my head down, focused on my studies and the debate team, but questions from classmates about my family situation were constant reminders that I didn't fit the mold. The stories I told were vague little white lies to protect myself from pity or awkwardness. One afternoon during a particularly rough day, I confided in Mr. Barnes about my growing anger and confusion. He listened intently, never interrupting, and finally said, "Sometimes the people who should be there for us the most let us down, but that doesn't mean we're broken or less deserving." I clung to those words, slowly beginning to understand that my worth wasn't tied to my parents' love or lack thereof. Then one day when I was 15, I stumbled upon more evidence of their life without me. While scrolling through their travel blog, I noticed new posts filled with pictures of beaches, luxury resorts, and Olivia smiling brightly. It was as if I had been erased, a ghost removed from their story. The blog entries detailed their journey to freedom, framing their abandonment of me as a courageous choice to shed burdens and live authentically. The bitterness I felt was overwhelming. They hadn't just left, they celebrated their escape. Comments on the blog ranged from praise to harsh criticism. Some anonymous voices accused them of irresponsibility and selfishness. I wanted to know who these people were, but the accounts were private, leaving me with more questions than answers. Around this time, I started taking on more responsibility. The debate team became my refuge, helping me channel my emotions into something productive. I also got a part-time job at a local bookstore, surrounded by stories and quiet moments that allowed me to breathe. I met Ryan there, a fellow student who treated me with kindness and respect. When I opened up about my past, he simply said, "That's messed up, man, but you're not alone." It was the first time I felt truly seen. Despite these new connections, the absence of my parents left a wound that never fully healed. They had chosen their path, and I was forced to build mine without them. At 16, I applied for scholarships, hoping education could be my way out of the shadows cast by my past. When I received the news of a full scholarship, it felt like a breakthrough, a validation that my efforts mattered. I shared the good news with the Barneses, who celebrated with me as if I were their own son. For once, I felt the warmth of family that wasn't defined by blood. However, just as I began to believe I could move forward, my parents re-entered my life unexpectedly. On my graduation day, Melissa and Daniel appeared in the crowd dressed like tourists fresh off a cruise. Their smiles were forced, their presence unwelcome. I confronted them, voicing the pain of their abandonment and the betrayal I'd carried for years. Olivia surprised me by standing with me, telling our parents they had done enough damage. The confrontation ended with my parents walking away, their facade cracking. The support of the Barneses and Ryan helped me hold my ground. From then on, my parents' attempts to reconnect were sporadic and often self-serving. They sent messages asking for forgiveness and financial help, but I blocked their efforts, choosing to protect the life I had fought so hard to build. After graduation, I thought I could finally close the painful chapter of my past. But my parents had other plans. Soon they started reaching out again, not with apologies, but with demands. It began with emails and phone calls, which I ignored. Then it escalated. One day I received a formal letter from a lawyer representing Melissa and Daniel. They were suing me, claiming I owed them financial support now that I was successful. The accusation stunned me. I was barely out of college working hard, but they expected me to bail them out after abandoning me at 12. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who reassured me it was a baseless claim. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said. "Don't engage unless it's through me." But their attempts didn't stop there. They began contacting my employer professors, even the Barneses, spreading false stories about me being ungrateful and selfish. The bookstore manager pulled me aside, concerned about the rumors. I felt violated, but also stronger knowing I had support. Meanwhile, Olivia publicly defended me. She posted a statement on social media, calling out our parents for their neglect and manipulation. Her words resonated with many, and her post went viral. It felt good to have her by my side, finally acknowledging the pain they caused. Despite this, Melissa and Daniel fought hard to maintain their false narrative, posting angry rants online blaming me for their hardships. But the public saw through it, and their credibility crumbled. During this turmoil, Olivia found a box of old financial documents belonging to our parents. It revealed a pattern of failed businesses, mounting debts, and fraud accusations. They had been living beyond their means, running from their responsibilities not just to me, but to many others. Knowing the truth was painful but empowering. They hadn't abandoned me because of money. They left because it was easier than facing their problems. I kept the documents as proof evidence of their lies and neglect. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting myself from further harm. With the support of the Barneses and Ryan, I continued to build my life. I started hosting financial literacy workshops on campus, teaching others to manage money wisely, something I had learned through hard experience. One day, a producer contacted me after hearing my story. They wanted to feature me in a documentary about resilience. After discussing with my support network, I agreed. Sharing my journey could help others facing similar challenges. The filming was intense. They asked about my parents. I spoke honestly, not to shame them, but to explain how their choices shaped me. "They don't define me," I said. During production, the team uncovered more about my parents' legal troubles, including eviction notices and fraud investigations. It was clear their downfall was as chaotic as their abandonment of me. When the documentary aired, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who saw their own struggles reflected in my story. It gave them hope and a sense of belonging. Melissa and Daniel tried to spin the story, but public opinion had shifted. They were no longer able to hide behind lies. Despite the storm caused by my parents' attempts to drag me back into their chaos, I was determined to keep moving forward. I had a roof over my head, a small, cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood of Austin, and a job at a local bookstore that I loved. Every paycheck felt like a brick in the foundation of the life I was building. I was no longer the scared 12-year-old left in foster care. I was a young man learning to stand on his own feet, forging a path defined by resilience and hope. School and work kept me busy. I threw myself into my studies, earning scholarships and praise from teachers who saw my potential. Outside of class, I began volunteering to teach financial literacy workshops to other young adults, hoping to share the lessons I had painfully learned about money responsibility and independence. My circle grew tighter. Ryan became like a brother, always there with encouragement and a joke when I needed it most. The Barnes family continued to support me like their own son. Their steady presence helped fill the void left by my birth parents. But even as I grew stronger, the echoes of the past sometimes resurfaced. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I saw a message from Olivia. She had started to distance herself from our parents, realizing their toxicity ran deeper than I had imagined. It was a relief to know I wasn't alone in recognizing the truth. Still, my parents found ways to interfere. Anonymous calls, messages to my employer, and legal threats became unwelcome disruptions. The stress was exhausting, but I refused to let them derail my progress. One particularly difficult day, my bookstore manager pulled me aside. "Ethan, if they bother you here again, please tell me. We want to protect you." That small show of solidarity meant more than words could express. Meanwhile, Olivia publicly stood with me. Her social media posts calling out our parents' neglect went viral, rallying support from strangers who had faced similar betrayals. It was empowering to see our story resonate beyond our family. The more they tried to pull me back, the more determined I became to sever ties. I blocked my parents on all platforms and focused on the family I had chosen, the people who truly cared. At college, I thrived. The scholarship I had worked so hard for allowed me to study without financial worries. I joined student organizations, made friends, and even started a small side hustle helping peers manage their finances. One afternoon, Ryan and I sat on the campus lawn talking about the future. "You've come so far," he said. "What's next for you?" I smiled, thinking about the possibilities. I want to build something that lasts, a life where I don't have to look back or wonder if I'm enough. Graduation day arrived like a bright beacon. Wearing my cap and gown, I felt a surge of pride walking across the stage to receive my diploma. The crowd's cheers filled the auditorium, but the real joy came from the faces of those who had stood by me, Ryan, the Barneses, and Olivia. After the ceremony, Melissa and Daniel appeared uninvited, their smiles hollow and out of place. The confrontation was inevitable. I voiced the pain of their abandonment, refusing to let their empty words diminish my accomplishments. Olivia surprised me by defending me, finally standing up to our parents for the first time. Their retreat was swift, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Life continued. I found peace in the family I had created through friendships, mentors, and community. My parents' absence no longer defined me. Instead, their choices fueled my determination to succeed. As the months turned into years, I slowly began to heal from the wounds left by my parents' abandonment. It wasn't an easy process. Some days were still heavy with anger and sadness, but I was learning that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about reclaiming my life on my own terms. The support from the Barneses and Ryan remained a constant source of strength. They reminded me that family isn't always who you're born to. It's who shows up, who cares, and who stands by you when it matters most. I continued expanding my financial literacy workshops, helping others avoid the pitfalls I had faced. Teaching became a way to transform my pain into purpose, and every session brought me closer to a sense of fulfillment I'd never known before. One evening, Olivia and I sat on the porch of my apartment reflecting on everything we'd endured. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't see it before how much they hurt you, but you were right all along." Her words meant more than she knew. In that moment, I realized forgiveness wasn't about excusing their behavior, it was about freeing myself from the grip of resentment. We made a pact to build a healthier relationship grounded in honesty and mutual respect separate from the toxic patterns of our childhood. Life was beginning to look different. I was no longer defined by the past but by the choices I made every day. Then came an unexpected message. A producer wanted to feature my story in a documentary about resilience and overcoming adversity. After consulting with my support system, I agreed. Sharing my journey with the world was daunting but empowering. I spoke candidly about the pain, the betrayal, and the strength it took to rise above it all. The documentary was met with overwhelming support. Messages poured in from people who felt seen, understood, and inspired by my experience. It reminded me that I wasn't alone and that my story had the power to help others. Meanwhile, my parents' attempts to regain control continued, but they no longer had a place in my life. I blocked their calls, emails, and messages, choosing instead to focus on the family I had created. The road ahead remained uncertain, but I faced it with confidence and hope. I had learned that family is not just about blood, it's about love, loyalty, and the courage to stand up for yourself. Through it all, I discovered that the greatest strength lies not in the absence of pain, but in the ability to rise above it. Graduation was a turning point, a day when all my hard work was celebrated by those who truly cared. But it was also a moment that made me reflect on what family really meant. Melissa and Daniel showed up uninvited and unexpected. Their smiles were forced and their words hollow. They claimed they wanted to reconnect to heal old wounds, but after everything, how could I trust them? I stood firm, telling them that family is more than blood. It's about who stands by you, supports you, and loves you unconditionally. I made it clear that their past actions had consequences and their chance to be part of my life had passed. Olivia, who had once been caught in their shadow, surprised me by defending me. She stood tall and told our parents that enough damage had been done. That day, I realized that the family I had chosen, the Barneses, Ryan, and my close friends, were my true family. They had shown me love, care, and respect when my birth parents could not. In the years since I have built a life I'm proud of, I bought a small home in a quiet neighborhood, filled it with laughter and love. I expanded my financial literacy workshops, reaching thousands of young people who, like me, needed guidance and hope. I often think back to that scared 12-year-old boy left alone, wondering if he'd ever be enough. Today, I know the answer: he was always enough. It just took time, support, and courage to see it. My story is not just about pain or betrayal. It's about resilience, growth, and the power of choosing your own path. Family is what you make it, and sometimes the family you find is stronger than the one you're born into.